Wow, how annoying is that? Uh, that is what the internet sounded to me like. It sounded like to me. Yeah, so I heard I saw just a little vlog by somebody in their, I guess, mid to late 40s about what the early internet was to them, and they brought up a very good point of, it. It's different person to person. I'm in my mid to late 50s, so for me, the internet was also a different experience. And what the internet really was, what we consider the internet, was, I think, a bit of a different experience. Um, excuse me, I'm sorry. I started off with an acoustic coupled dumb terminal with a printer on it. Uh, you'll see the on the left of the screen, rather, that typewriter looking thing. That's a dumb terminal. It has a keyboard and a printer on it. And didn't do any computing inside of it. You had to. It was essentially just the input and the output. It was like hooking up the keyboard and the screen, but it had the communications electronics to send modem signals across a telephone line, and hook up to a mainframe computer or a mini-frame, sort of like a server. Like, we don't have to get too technical about it, but it would you would dial in with a telephone, and at the time, an acoustic coupled modem, which was basically, if you look at the upper left there, you might have seen those before. I think War Games, they visually they used one. What it was is the computer sounds would come out your telephone handset, and you just jammed it in these two rubber cups, and there was a speaker and a microphone, complementary, a microphone listening to the telephone speaker, and a speaker that would shoot into the telephone's mic. Uh, so that the computer could talk back and forth. So what you're really talking about is a computer sending an electronic signal down the line, turning it into sound through their speaker and microphone. The other side listening and taking that sound and turning it back into an electronic signal. It was not very reliable. Excuse me. It did work, but you could only pull at that time about 110 baud. 300 was possible, but 110 baud was what I think actually what my system was limited to. Baud is basically, without getting all mathy about it, it's essentially a bit per second. So you get 110 bits per second, which with ASCII, American Standard Code of Information Interchange, how you encoded characters and things, got you about 10 characters a second. That's about a fast read. So you could, if you're on a video terminal, you could actually fast read along with the stuff coming out. Yeah, you had to move it, read it at a good clip, but you could do it. But eventually, 300 was around. It was a little, it was just a matter of getting the equipment. I was always maybe a little bit behind just because of the cost. I couldn't afford that stuff. But I did get it 300 relatively quickly from there, and I got you up to 300 characters, or excuse me, 30 characters per second, 300 bits per second ish. Uh, excuse me. And I remember when the Trimline phone came out. I mean, this is back when the phones were, they didn't have jacks. You hardwired them right into the wall. And at the time, it was funny. The phone company actually owned all that. You rented the phone hardware from the phone company. You didn't actually own your own phone hardware. Uh, that's just how it was done. And the Trimline came out, that orange phone on the screen, which was supposed to be sleek and modern, didn't fit those acoustic couplers. How annoying was that? So that was kind of an issue. But around that time, the plugs started coming out, and so you could plug directly in. You didn't have to do that from an electrical signal to an acoustic signal back to an electrical signal. You could just keep it electrical all the way through, and it allowed for things too, like auto dialing. It still is pulse tick 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 tick. That's what those rotary phones do. Is they actually just make a series of ticks by connecting and disconnecting the line. Which, if you've ever seen the 1995 movies Hackers, the Phantom Freak, a phreaker, which is a phone hacker, uh, is in jail, and they have the dial, the rotary dial, covered up, and he keys the numbers. It just keys 10 to get to the operator by very fastly hitting that cradle button, the hang up button. And that's all those dials did, was actually just flip that switch really fast. And that's how pulse dialing worked. And then they moved to tone dialing. But both were supported for a long time. Anyway, but yeah, so that's how I connected. And excuse me, I'm sorry. Getting used to this kind of stuff. I connected with with a dumb terminal, and it spat out printer paper, which that annoying sound that you heard after the modem handshake that I think we've all kind of heard in popular culture. That buzzy sound was a dot matrix printer, which was a matrix of pins that would just stamp ink into the paper in these little grids. It's all dots. It's all little dots. You'll look at the character. I should have put one up. I'm sorry, but I would do it on fan fold tractor feed paper. If you look up upper right, that sort of example. Now you'd see these stuff all over the computer labs. It was fan fold because it was folded like a fan or like a map kind of. One forward fold, one backward fold, one forward fold, one backward fold. And it was perforated about every 11.5, depending on the paper, about every 11.5 inches, just like a regular sheet of paper. So you could tear them apart into regular sheets of paper. But otherwise, it was continuous. It would just come like a machine gun's ammo belt, right? It would just keep going. You get these boxes of like 3 reams of just fanfold paper. So you would just continuously print. And to keep it aligned, instead of using like friction rollers or anything, they would often have what's called tractor feed, which if you look on either side of that big piece of paper, there's a strip with holes in it, and the holes would align with these little pinwheels that would just move the paper up. So it was kind of a very solid, it wasn't a friction connection, it was a solid connection. And then when you pulled the paper out, those were perforated, and you could rip off these little strips that were maybe like a 1/2 inch wide and as long as the paper was, and those things would be like all over the lab and stuff. There's always these back in the day, these the garbage cans. We'd usually have like one of the big cardboard boxes. You'd get one of the last batch paper, and you just start shoving them in there. But those things would just kind of go everywhere if you didn't watch it, and people would fidget with them and stuff. Often they were, depending where you worked, you could get letter size, but often they were like ledger size, like 14.5 inches across instead of like 8.5. They're big, and green and white, so you could kind of get different lines for sort of accounting, and helped with programming. You could just helped you kind of visually differentiate it, but you could get it all in plain white paper too. But yeah, just print along. You'd be typing along and that's so it was a very, very slow process. And what I would log into, what my place I had access to was a VAX computer. It was a Digital Equipment Corporation's VAX. It's a little mini frame, and that's what's sort of in the middle. The lower middle is there's a picture of a big box with a terminal in front of it. That's what it looks like closed, and then opened up. That was the guts, what they look like in there. Your phone has more power, I'm sure, than that these days. But we would log into that. And I'd log into that after hours. The university was pretty. We had some other things, but that we could log into. But the university was pretty. The sysops at mine were pretty. Like, this was pre-university. I was a kid, and they were pretty cool after hours, letting us log on, and if we didn't cause any problems. And they knew we were using, passwords that had been lifted, or kind of almost permissively lifted. But we weren't bugging anybody's systems. Just it was an extra password for an admin account or the guest account or something, not an admin account. But we wouldn't mess with. We didn't even have access to the guts to mess things up. So we were just running applications. There were SIG, special interest groups. You could do kind of chats. This is all text based, and some of it was real time. A lot of it wasn't. But one of the things that was always popular was a Star Trek game. This was text-based. It actually, if you look at the lower right of the screen, I put up a picture of it. It does have a map, but it's just it's just a text-based app or text-based map, just a kind of a little graph of where your things are, like K for Klingon and these sorts of things. The original game was probably published, I don't know, 72, 74, somewhere in there. There's a lot of early, like, academic computing type stuff. Games go way earlier than people think. Pong was originally on an oscilloscope. So this was, the original game played on a microcomputer, basically a PC, back, before everybody kind of had them. It was a single player experience, but when you went into the VAX, you could play a networked version of Trek, and so it was a multiplayer game, which was pretty neat. That was sort of groundbreaking to my little mind. You could fight other people, and the funny thing I remember about it was written in BASIC language, which was interpreted, and I think it's a retronym, but ostensibly it stands for Beginner's All-Purpose Symbolic Instruction Code, which I think they started with BASIC because it's a basic, and they said, let's make it a cool acronym, and they call it retronym. When you do that, it's like, so it sounds all cool. BASIC. Still, I think I cherish that language, though. I think it was a great start, and it's like you could pull a computer out of the box, and as a kid, there you start programming. And it was a pretty streamlined way of getting started. I mean, it wasn't most efficient, but it was pretty streamlined way of getting started. You didn't have to do a lot of environment declarations and initializing your variables and all that kind of stuff. But it was what it was. It was a beginner's thing. But the funny thing about that is, but I digress. The funny thing about that is, there's a Control-C command, which means to break the program, which means to stop its execution. And then you can type in cont for continue, and it'll start up again. So you're playing the Star Trek game, and it's running an instance of the program for you, and these guys come in, some of the players come in, and they start hammering you. The Klingons are hammering you and messing you up. So you hit Control-C break, and it would essentially stop your part of the program and your instance of the program, and it'd freeze you in time. It wouldn't react. Nobody could shoot you, but you couldn't shoot. You were just this static, frozen thing because no data was getting transferred anymore. So your enemies that are beating you up would get board and finally take off, and you could hit cont, and your program would start up from where it left off, and off you'd go. You could go back in. So it was kind of a really cheesy thing to do. It was for fun. Sure, I'm sure some people got mad who cared, but we were all just learning computers at the time. But that's how we'd get in, and there was all kinds of stuff on that. Now at this time, I remember when the internet hit 2,000 nodes. Whoa. Now, that's not 2,000 users. That's like 2,000 individual, like kind of the servers, sort of what you could call them, the mainframes that would support many users. So like 2,000 university or, government, these kinds of, institutions, institutional computers of those. And the individual users, it's sort of like a LAN and a WAN. The users would call into their mainframe computer, and then those mainframe computers, so that was like a star pattern. All the individual users would call into their local computer, and then their local mainframe, that was more like a web. Those were an interconnected web of computers that would talk to one another. So the individual user, they're really not that different than an ISP or something, I suppose, as you're calling in. But it was very sparse, so that it was very apparent that's how it happened. And really the internet is just the internet protocol, which is basically you're sending packets. Your packet switch network instead of a circuit switch network. When I call on a telephone line now this is on the old POTS, plain old telephone system. When I would call on a telephone line, there would be a circuit that would be, that the copper wire, then the switches would hook me up directly to the the phone line that the mainframe was on. And so that's a dedicated circuit. The signals are just going back and forth, right? And the fact that I've dialed into it is what actually created the address. That's the address is the phone number, and it would create a direct connection. That's called a circuit switch network. Then the internet, what the whole thing about the internet is, it's called packet switched. You take a bunch of data and you break it down into individual packets, and you put an address on it. That's like, oh, it's registered to the University of Colorado's mainframe, and so that little packet will jump around and find a path. We'll just communicate with other computers on the internet through the internet protocol. That's what the IP part is, and find its way over to the University of Colorado's computer, and it'll assemble itself. The individual packets might not even take the same route, but they'll assemble themselves into the file. There's going to be experts that know a lot more about that, or it's like, just kind of a 10,000 foot view of it. That's the difference between packet switched and circuit switched. The internet is really a packet switched system, which made it robust. Because packets can go different ways. There was even I want to say about the year, I don't know, probably before the year 2000, in the late 90s, there was IPOAC, Internet Protocol over avian carriers, which means if you look in the middle, there's kind of a little graph of that with two little pigeons. You could send packet. It was a joke that worked. You could send individual packets by carrier pigeon. What would happen is there'd be somebody on the internet that would sit there, and they'd get a readout of the data from a packet, and they would write it down, like with the IP address, write it down, put it on a carrier pigeon, shoot the carrier pigeon over to their friend, who would retranscribe it and re-enter it onto a computer. And so that packet had actually passed through a carrier pigeon. It was a joke that worked. It's actually, it's not practical, but it was funny because, I don't know, there's been like 100 packets or something that has been sent over the last 25 years. But it did kind of show flexibility of what could happen, and there were even thoughts, it's like, well, if you put a thumb drive on there, you could actually pump quite a bit of data that way. But it was interesting. That was, it was expansive at that time, and people were trying different things. So that was it was a really interesting time, and back at that day, this is all pre-web. The internet is, that's the difference. The internet is not the web. The internet is a underlying communication protocol for that kind of stuff. Emails and all kinds of things, but it wasn't have web pages. It was just a way of computers to talk to one another. And so these different applications and things that people would use, and it was a little more of a felt experimental and maybe a Wild West show. It wasn't, it wasn't about social media and all these things. It was just a different environment. A lot of hobbyists, a lot of students, like computer science geeks, stuff like that. But still, people were very interested in a variety of things. One thing I do like about it is, you hear a lot of times people like, I want to hang out with like-minded people. I think some of the modern stuff, there's a great book about it, The Great Sort, it's called, where people have kind of clustered that way, where in the past, with the limited communication, you weren't as maybe selective in terms of people just had, it's weird, there were fewer people, but in some ways they were more diverse because you couldn't just select everybody out. Like now it seems like you can be like, I'm only going to hang out with like-minded people, and I'm going to select people out and highly curate it because there's so much data. I can filter, more. Back in the day, if you filtered, you weren't talking to anybody. So it was a little different. So it was kind of diverse, because computers were still primitive. Sure, there were people that were, into computer technology and things, but they'd often have different hobbies. You could find enthusiasts for just about anything, and there were times too when it was almost like ham radio operators, where you're allowed to if you're a radio operator, you can have a guest on there. You're in control of the radio, and you've got to follow all that. But you can have a guest talk to somebody if you like. They're trying to if the comms lines are down, you're trying to get them. Same kind of thing. I would, be setting up on the computer, but a non-technical user. It's like, yeah, why don't you talk to these guys? So that was a whole thing. And I thought it was interesting. There's lots of little rabbit holes to go down to. People with very specific interests. But you got exposed to that, and that was really neat. I thought it opened it up, and appreciate other people's interests. I wasn't just trying to feed my own interests. It really was an expansive world, and that's how the internet worked. Though there were other things besides the internet at those times that were still networks. You've probably heard of. You may have heard. I'm sorry. That was. How do I know what you've heard of? Computer BBSs, bulletin board systems. What an individual user, and I think we all had one at one time, would do would be they would set their home computer up. This is kind of when the home computers were getting more. Not everybody had them, but they're more common. You would set your home computer up, and you would run a piece of brew or run a piece of software that if somebody called in on your home phone line to your computer, you could swap files or leave messages. That's actually how a lot of what cracked software got transmitted that way, though it could take a long time. But and you'd find like text versions, like ASCII versions, the Anarchist Cookbook and all kinds of things. But there'd be these little isolated silos of interest, and you would sometimes on cracked software, you'd actually find somebody would replace the kind of splash screen, the open screen with a advertisement for a BBS, for a bulletin board system. And you could call into there the Freeze and a bunch of these people. But it was very odd because since it was often hobbyists that were running these things, and it was on their home phone line, they either had two phone lines or often you would run those things in the dark of the night. After your family went to sleep, you'd turn on your computer to answer and your modem to auto answer, and maybe from like 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the morning, your system would be up. It's almost like little pirate radio stations or something that would pop up and down. My favorite pirate radio station was, I used to live in a place called Nederland, Colorado, and we had Radio Ned, this pirate radio station. He would play, he was a big Deadhead. So he played a lot of Grateful Dead music, but he had a transmission radius of this little town. And it was pretty awesome. Radio Ned. Don't know what happened to that. I'm sure the FCC probably eventually got bothered with him. But then again, this is the same place where a guy wanted to cryogenically freeze his brother, but he couldn't afford it. So he kept his brother in a shed with dry ice for years. They finally busted him on that. But there is now a festival called Frozen Dead Guy Day up there. What a great little town. It's outside of Boulder by about 8,300 feet, about 20 miles outside of Boulder up the canyon. So it's a little mountain town. Good times. But that's how those BBSs worked. Now, there was an interesting system that was halfway between bulletin board systems and the internet. And it's still, I believe it's still probably functioning. It used nodes. What happened is some guys, hobbyists, got together to see if this could work. And they're like, oh, well, the problem is with all these, you only connect, these bulletin board systems are too isolated, right? It's like they're these little islands, and that's neat, but, connecting them would be good. It would be more robust, especially since the phone line's going down, or, sometimes BBSs would go down because the dude's mom would be like, get that off my phone line. I'm trying to use it and your grandma's sick, and all these kinds of things. So, they came up with a thing called a FidoNet, which was basically nodes that BBSs, and they would use a store and forward. If I called into FidoNet node 2, which is somebody's computer, I could leave a mail or whatever, and it would save it, and then eventually when that node called in to another BBS, it would another FidoNet node. It would transfer that over. It's called store and forward. It would store the information and forward it. So it actually was very primitive. It was a sort of internetwork. It wasn't the internet, capital I, and it used its own little protocol. It was a primitive hobbyist thing, but it grew and it did quite well. And it was all, since the connections were all circuit switched, they're phone lines. And eventually, I think they put an interface so that it could punch out. It's all about just formats and getting the data. You could maybe go through FidoNet to the internet kind of thing. But it was not quite real time, which was store and forward. So at that time you're sending messages, and it's not so much a real time chat or anything like this, or you're getting files. You'd leave up a document, those kinds of things. But it was really neat because it was all sort of citizen driven, and it was a little more decentralized. I mean, they did have for management reasons, they had to have a crew to kind of like administrate, like, this is how it's going to work. Node 51, like when you did a new node, you'd actually call the node 51, and it would check that you were live so that it could create a list of nodes that would work. You may be getting a little over technical, but it was just a different time in terms of the user experience was real different. And it's like the other user who's maybe 10, 12 years younger than I am, had the nostalgia for their period, AOLs and these sorts of things. And I've got a nostalgia for my period, I suppose. Oh, one thing that was kind of fun was I remember accidentally I made a markup language, not because I'm a boy genius, but that's just the way things go, and it barely worked. So I had a BBS, and I'm like, well, it's like, this is all text. Wouldn't it be cool if we could do graphics and stuff? And at the time, I was using an Apple II, and it didn't. You couldn't display text and graphics natively on the same screen. You had a text screen and a graphics screen. But I wanted them all to mix up, so I made a little basic program that I made it so I could draw the graphics of the characters on the screen. If you sent it text strings like print, it would print it out on the graphic screen. And then I added things like drawing primitives, like, here's how you can draw a line, and here's how you can draw a circle. And the circle was difficult. I didn't implement it very well. It was really slow and clunky in squares and things. That was easy. And it was slow and clunky, but it actually did work. And I realized later it was a markup language, which, at the time I hadn't heard of a markup language. But it was just kind of fun. It was real slow and it's clunky, but it produced graphics, and it was a fun experiment. I really enjoyed that time. I don't even program anymore. It's been so long, and that's okay. It's like, I think there's a time maybe when you push through, the technologies, and kind of push that forward, and then go off and do other things. And it's changed a lot. And now other people can use the internet or these communication networks for what they want. There are some parts that, I guess, do I wish were back? Well, the funny thing I find is the older generation, like in your generation, you hold on to certain things. Like I teach some people in a totally different field, and I've taught some teenagers in this field. And the funny thing is, I would leave stuff in their email, and it turns out they don't check email. They're just used to text messages and things. So they weren't like, it's like, hey, did you get the materials? It's like, go ahead and submit that back to me. And it's like, they don't do email, which is real weird. To me, it's real weird. It's just, but to them, that's how it is, so that's just part of it. But I still use email. I like it because it's device agnostic. I can get onto it from a variety of devices, which works better for me. And I can transfer files, or at least if the files are too big. But but that's where I came from. Is email, and then when email went browser-based, but it was kind of agnostic to it was a protocol, and it was agnostic to the application you're using. So that use model has changed. I don't use social media, at least not to the way people do now, of like when they say, what's your socials? The shortening of that, like that's sort of the default communication method. Uh, I don't do that. I guess, that's why I'm putting this up. YouTube, I remember YouTube kind of used to like, we're going to YouTube, it's your tube, we're going to host your videos. It's more of a video hosting thing, where now it's become a platform, a media platform, televisionized, televaginalized. I don't know what you would call it, where it's become, just sort of another version of cable or something. And you've got all these players that are making content, and looking to make, as a profession and make money from this content. And it's become, it's become its own media circus, where at the very beginning it was an interesting way of like dropping home movies to your friends. I'm not lamenting it, and it's like that's usually how I have done it. It's like, hey, here's a little thing I did a little video of Christmas, and here it is. So a lot of times they're just private, or nobody wants to see them. Yeah, so it's just different. And the thing is, though, I think, and I will stop rambling here in a second, but I think the thing is, you can choose. You don't have to use it one way or the other. People are all about these the search algorithms and the suggestion algorithms that push content to you, to push programming to you. It's certainly a valid way, and I mean, the video that I listened to was pushed to me, and I have no idea why. And I do. I'll spend like how I'll do it. I'll spend a little bit of, it's not even guilty pleasure time, but I spend a little bit of time seeing what is recommended to me, and letting that happen. But that part of my media diet is finite, and I stop that and then go about my day communicating with people through more organic methods, where I'm in control of who I'm talking to, or I'm in control of what I decide to watch. So I'll, even if it's an academic channel or something I like to watch, I go there specifically. I don't even bother with the alerts and things, because it seems like YouTube manipulates those. So if there is a small channel on YouTube, say, which is pretty much what I use, I find a lot of the other stuff not particularly useful. I'll decide to go check them out specifically, and I don't just rely on the notifications, because they seem to be inconsistent at best, I guess. But that's how I choose to do things, and now that's part of my generation. I get that. That's cool. But there are options. I guess the only thing is, the other person was lamenting about the change in how it seems like it's getting very algorithmically driven in terms of these suggestion engines, that dark pattern, and they're doing it for their purposes. And okay, that's what that system does. It's a use it for what it is, and then choose other avenues to establish that communication. So it's almost like, now that I think about it, these data pushes of the information to you is a little bit like a packet switch. They're shooting you little chunks. Whereas when I decide I like that channel, or I'm interested in this, I'll just go manual look, and that's almost like circuit switch. It's like I'm connecting the direct telephone line to them, so that I can get that communication. Anyway, I've been babbling for like half an hour. It's a new year. I guess I'm trying to figure out how this is all going to work, and I thought I'd make this ridiculous video because, and shout into the void, just because. And it seems like it's one of the new ways of communicating, and yeah, so I'll participate a little bit. Hey, thanks for listening to some rambling.